Hi, today I'm going to talk about 9 rookie mistakes new piano teachers make when they start teaching. I'm going to talk about the problems with these, why it's a problem, and also what to do in place of the problem. The first thing that I see a lot in rookie piano teachers is teaching scales too soon. The problem with that is it's an advanced technique. It requires the student to be able to understand rotation in order to cross fingers. It also requires the student to understand the motion of in and out at the piano, to move in and out of black keys, and also to play the thumb. And it requires a very flexible, supple hand technique. And that is not something that can be developed quickly. Sometimes it can take several years for students to really train and learn the correct techniques to be able to execute a scale. So instead of doing scales, it's wise to start with 5-finger groups or patterns, or you can teach tetrascales if you really want them to learn scales, or if they're ready for scales mentally but not quite technically. Another issue with teaching scales too soon is the fact that it is more of an advanced theory concept as well. They need to understand sharps, flats. They also need to understand keyboard topography, and then having a theory background will strongly help them with their scales as well. So teaching scales too soon is going to come back and actually bite you later on, because it will develop tension in the students' hands. They'll have choppy scales. Their finger crossing, they'll try to sneak the thumb, or they'll do this kind of a motion, or they'll twist the wrist. There are many different problems that will develop, so it's better to wait to teach more advanced techniques and wait until they're very much ready for it, instead of teaching it too soon and now you have to go back and fix problems. The second thing that I see is giving students pieces that are too difficult. And by that, I mean the notes are too difficult, or the rhythms are too difficult, the technique that needs to execute the piece correctly is too difficult, or the length of the piece is just too much. So those are the biggest things that would cause a piece to be too difficult. Giving a student a piece that's too difficult is going to frustrate them. It's also going to take them a very long time to learn that piece. And really, students shouldn't take that long to learn a piece. Unless you're working with more advanced students, and they can take a little longer. But most students at the beginner level should only take 1 to maybe 4 weeks to learn a piece, and it should be something that they can master in that time frame. A way to be able to tell if the piece is a good level for them is they should be able to sight read through the piece, at least most of it, pretty successfully. They should also be able to know all of the notes that are in there, and there are some exceptions to that, and I can make a video on that later with teaching note reading and things. But it should be something that they can master. If you're teaching a rote piece, they should be able to understand the concept behind the piece, such as the rhythm or where it's at on the keyboard. Another way to keep from mislabeling pieces, or misleveling pieces rather, is understand how to level pieces. Now, a lot of pedagogy books will have things like beginner, or late beginner, or late elementary, or early intermediate, or late intermediate. But not all leveling, as far as that goes, is created equal. Those are all very different in leveling. The leveling I'm talking about is done by Jane McGraw, and she has a really, really good book on leveling classical pieces, and I can share the link in the description box down below on her book. But I definitely recommend getting her book, because then you can look up pieces, and she has things leveled on a number system between 1 and 10. 1 being the easiest, 10 being the most difficult. But the way to understand leveling pieces is you need to understand what a beginner piece truly looks like versus a late elementary piece. So, and I'll make a video on how to level pieces and what that means. And I'll show you some examples. I have a binder of pieces that I already have leveled out myself, plus I use her book. So I'll get into that in another video, but just be careful about giving pieces that are too difficult. If you question if a piece is too difficult, it probably is. You don't want to give pieces that are too easy though. So take a couple of pieces and have them sight read them and make a decision from there on what piece would best fit them. Third, this is a big one actually, and this one kind of bugs me. The overuse of metronome. There are quite a few beginner teachers that a lot of us grew up with teachers that were very strict on using metronomes for everything. In modern pedagogy, we kind of get away from that, and I'll explain why here in a second. But having a student practice absolutely everything with a metronome, their scales, every single piece they're doing, their etudes, and their technical exercises, it's not a good thing. And the reason why is they do not learn to build within themselves an internalized feeling for rhythm, because something is doing that for them. The metronome is clicking, or it's beeping, or it's flashing lights, or whatever their metronome does. It's doing that work for them. So what it's actually doing, it's not strengthening their abilities to feel rhythm. It's becoming a crutch and crippling their ability to feel rhythm. So you want to avoid the metronome. In fact, with my beginner students, I don't actually introduce the metronome for the first 1 to 2 years, unless they really need it, which is rare. And I can again make another video on how to teach rhythm in a way that they can internalize and feel that, so that they don't have to rely on the metronome. Another thing that the metronome causes when it's overused is it leads to very robotic, stiff playing. Music is an art. It's not something that we just very, very mechanically play absolutely everything the same. It's musical, so we're going to kind of ebb and flow. Now we want our rhythm, our beats to be correct, but what it prevents them from learning is the ability to, for example, do rubato or play ritardandos or feel music is what it's going to inhibit them in being able to do. So instead of using the metronome, what you want to do is teach them how to internalize rhythm. And you start by teaching them what pulse is versus rhythm. Or another word for pulse would be beat. And that's the very consistent 1, 2, 3, 4, if you're in 4/4 time. The rhythm then works around that. That would be your quarter notes, your eighth notes, 16th notes, 32nd notes, and so on, is going to work around that pulse. What they have to do is learn how to internalize that pulse within themselves and then learn to feel rhythm. And there are many different ways you can teach rhythm to help students internalize rhythm, especially students that even really struggle with it. I have some good tips for that, so I'll make a video on that at some point. Teaching them to feel rhythm is going to teach them to be musical and artistic. So we want to avoid overusing the metronome. The most common reasons why I personally have a student use a metronome is to practice scales or a hand and exercise and work on speeding it up, because then we can gradually up the ticks and the level or the speed of the ticks to help them learn how to play faster. I do occasionally assign students to practice pieces or sections of a piece with a metronome if they're really struggling to feel that pulse around their rhythm, and we'll practice it in lessons, so I make sure that they know how to do it at home in their at-home practice. So metronome should be used strategically with a good purpose and reason behind it, speeding something up or perfecting a passage with a little help from a metronome. The next thing that I see quite often in rookie teachers is having students play hands separately for absolutely every piece they do. This was something we actually talked about in my pedagogy classes in university. And we've all kind of come to the conclusion, and modern pedagogy generally agrees with this, that playing hands separately with everything is actually crippling the student and holding them back. So just like with the metronome, we don't want to overuse hands separate. Now, hand separate practice in and of its own, when it's used correctly, is an extremely important skill to understand and know how to use and to actually use it. And even people at my level, there are some passages and pieces where I will practice hands separately just because I need to master a certain technique and I've got to focus on, for example, like my left hand, and then I can add the right hand to it. So the problem with teaching hands separately on absolutely everything, you're teaching the student to be a pianist that plays with one hand instead of two. That's part of the reason why piano is a little bit harder than a lot of other instruments, is the fact that we have to play two hands at the same time that are doing different things. And a student can't learn that if they're practicing everything hands separately. And I know a lot of rookie teachers struggle with, well, how do I help a student learn how to put hands together? There are ways to do it. There are ways to do it that are extremely easy, that are not difficult for the student. And again, I can make another video on that at some point as well. But you want to avoid using hands separately, honestly. In fact, I seldom have my beginners use hands separate practice. Most of my students that I have them use hand separate practice are at the intermediate to advanced level, because like I said earlier, we want to practice a certain passage and get that skill down. For example, like in the Liszt Un Sospiro piece, there is a section in their chromatic scale section where the pattern is a little challenging to put both hands together. So that would be a section I would have them practice the right hand until that hand's very comfortable with the pattern. Practice the left hand until it's comfortable with the pattern, then put them together. That would be an example of using hands separate practice wisely. Another thing that playing hands separately does, again, it inhibits musicality, because the student is so focused on, basically, I guess, it's kind of like they're learning three pieces. They're learning the right hand, and then they're learning the left hand, and then they have to learn both hands together. So instead of being able to focus on getting the rhythm to flow, getting dynamics, and feeling it musically, they're now having to basically learn the piece 3 times. So we want to avoid hand separate practice in beginners for sure, and use it again, like the metronome, use it for a strategic purpose. And then your students will be more successful, and they will not have issues later either trying to play hands together, because they'll already be used to doing that. Number 5, too much over-explaining or talking in lessons, and every single teacher does this, I promise you. So again, in university, we had to teach lessons and record our lessons and then watch ourselves, and it's pretty astonishing when you watch yourself teach just how much we can talk in a lesson. And it's also, again, astonishing to realize we can cut out a good 3/4 of what we say in lessons and rely on other skills to help the student learn. So most people take 30-minute lessons. I know there are exceptions, but 30-minute lesson is very short, right? It's very limited time to be able to work on pieces, technique, learn new things, work on concepts that the student is struggling with, do theory, ear training. There are so many things that we have to try to fit in a 30-minute lesson. And what you want to do is, 1, to stop yourself from over talking. And I'm not talking like just sitting there having a conversation with your student. I'm talking teaching, talking. You want to demonstrate more than you talk. And the reason demonstration is more effective than talking as well is because the student can watch your technique, they can hear what you're doing, and then they can feel it in the music, okay? So you want to use demonstration more than talking. And a lot of times I will take my students' music, and I have 2 pianos in my studio, and I will put their music on my piano, and I will demonstrate what I want them to do. And then I will hand them their music and say, okay, I want you to do exactly what I did, copy what I did. And then we'll talk about why. For example, I'll take a piece and I'll play a section and I'll ask them, what did I do differently here than what you did? Well, you played the right hand louder than the left hand. Yes, I would like you to try that now, because the right hand has the melody and we need to hear that over the left hand. So right there, instead of taking 10 minutes to explain that concept, I just showed them and explained it in about 3 minutes. So demonstration is the best way to go. Another way to cut out talking is be picky about what you want to correct in their piece. And we'll get into that a little bit more in the next part of our discussion in this video, but don't pick out everything. Pick out a couple of things that they did really, really well, and pick out 1 or 2 things that need to be worked on. And you want to use the sandwich method. You want to start by, this was excellent. You played this passage here so cleanly and so well. You executed it very well. Good job. Okay, over here in the middle of our sandwich method, you forgot to voice the top voices in the chords in the right hand. So let's work on that a little bit. And then also down in this section, you got that rhythm this time, and that was very well done. So you want to use the sandwich method. Encourage, correct, encourage. That keeps you simple and short. And it also keeps them encouraged and excited to say, okay, I did 2 things really well. I just need to work on this one little thing. And they can have a bunch of things really to work on, but just pick 1 or 2 things that are really important for that lesson to work on. If you do have to explain something, which we do have to do that occasionally, make sure you understand what your point is that you're trying to get at and pick the quickest way to explain it. And part of that's going to be understanding your student and their learning style. Another part of it is going to be very quick on your thinking on your feet and explaining, okay, Julie, you struggled with the left hand part over here with the Alberti bass. Let's work on rotation. Let's do this motion in the air. That will be a quick verbal explanation where you get directly into actually executing the concept that you're trying to correct. Okay, so the next thing, fixing every error is a rookie mistake, because we're like, oh my gosh, if we don't correct rhythm, they're going to get this wrong forever. Or they missed 5 notes, and if we don't correct that now, they're going to miss that. Or their technique, they're slouching. There are just so many things that we can correct in a piece. So you have to pick what's the most important thing. And if you have to pick one thing, rhythm is important, very important, and technique is important. Notes are important too, but keep in mind, people hit wrong notes, right? So it may not be a huge deal to let that slide 1 week and just make a note that next week, I'm going to listen to see if they play that note again. And if they play that note wrong again next week, then I'll address it then. So you have to be picky and not pick out every single thing, because again, it's going to take up way too much of your lesson. It's also going to discourage your student, because if you give them 2 things they did really well and you spend the next 25 minutes of the lesson going over absolutely everything they missed, they're going to be like, I'm no good at this. I'm just going to quit. And the other problem that comes from overcorrecting mistakes is students become afraid to make mistakes. And I've had students, and I have one right now, who have transferred to me from other teachers. And when they make one mistake, they literally physically jump, or they get this fearful look on their face. And I'm like, it's okay. And I make a joke. I say, if you hit a wrong note, the piano's not going to burst into flames or something like that. And then they laugh. It lightens the mood. And then in time with studying with me, they realize a wrong note isn't really a huge deal. And sometimes when I sight read for them, I'll be like, oh, shoot, I hit a wrong note there, and they'll laugh. So you have to kind of pick and choose, and also understand, you have to know your student too, like how much internally, how much criticism can they really handle? Can this student handle all this criticism? Or is this student the type of student that I'm just going to fix one thing on this week and we'll address the others later? So you want to be careful about how many errors and corrections you make on a piece. The next thing is neglecting the flow of rhythm for notes. And I see this often in beginners and rookie teachers, and please understand, I'm not like crashing out on people who are new piano teachers. These are all things that I did that was worked out in my pedagogy training. It's things that all of my classmates did in university. It's things that I see in teachers still to this day when they observe my lessons or anything like that, or if I get their students transferring to me, we all make these mistakes. So this is just me trying to help you, teach you these things now so that you don't make these mistakes that we all made in our time. So neglecting flow of rhythm for notes. So a lot of teachers will be like, okay, we have to get the notes down. The notes are important. But what ends up happening is the student will stop at a bar line. They'll play, 3 beats in a 3/4 time piece, and then they'll stop on that last beat and hold it for an extra beat. So now it's turning into 4/4. I see that all the time. And they stop at the bar line, or they aren't quite comfortable with a section, so they pause their way through it. They'll play a little bit and then stop and pause, and then they'll play a little bit more and stop and pause. And rookie teachers tend to kind of let students get away with that. You don't want to let them get away with that. The rhythm is a little bit more important than the notes are, because rhythm is internalized and felt. Notes can be corrected a little bit easier. So you want to address the rhythm, and especially in beginner students. I'll even take a 3x5 card or a flash card, and I will cover their measure as they're playing so they cannot go back and fix mistakes or stop. And I will keep that flash card moving along their music to kind of force them to keep going, so they learn to continue to play in spite of mistakes. So that's something that you want to make sure that you do. Otherwise, what you're going to do is teach them to play, to learn a piece with those pauses, and then it's actually really difficult to get them to stop those pauses, and that's going to be a situation where you're going to have to pull a metronome out, or you're going to have to like retrain them to play that piece or something like that. So again, it's having to relearn something that they didn't really need to have happen in the first place. So rhythm is going to be a priority. You want to make sure that they're flowing and not stopping. If they're struggling with a section on notes, then stop and fracture practice that section so they can get those notes down, and then they'll flow just fine. 8, sticking to the same curriculum your teacher used, or sticking to the same curriculum that you prefer. So now, there are certain things that we do tend to use that have been passed down from generation to generation. One big one that we all know is Hanon. Hanon is definitely an important book to use. Those exercises are very good for all pianists in my experience in my teaching. But for example, I grew up on like Schaum and Thompson. My teacher definitely used way in the dark ages materials. I didn't even know about Faber actually, even though I guess it was available in Bastion and things, but my teacher had me in Schaum and Thompson. Those things are so ancient. I don't even use any of those really at all. They're just so old and so outdated, and I personally do not prefer their teaching concepts. So don't stick to the same curriculum that your teacher used. Go out and learn what else is out there. There's a lot of great curriculum out there now that is very strong and better teaches age appropriately for littler students or older students. You want to make sure that you're using the right curriculum for the right student. Now, sticking to one curriculum that you prefer, I'm kind of tossed on that, because I actually tend to use Tales of a Musical Journey for all of my beginners. But the reason I do is because the concept behind that method works really well for teaching note reading and technique. So it works for everybody. But I do occasionally have students that come to me who couldn't really handle Tales, or they need something a little different. So I will put them in like Faber. So you have to know your student, and you need to know curriculum and understand, again, not all curriculum is created equal. It's all very different. So you want to go through and learn your curriculum. I have a video, I'll link that with this video, on how to choose curriculum and how to know what's out there and available for curriculum. Using curriculum that is not correct for that student, or using old, outdated curriculum, is going to trap you and your student. It's going to trap your teaching and hold you back. Modern pedagogy is constantly changing and updating according to psychology, or like teaching techniques and things at the piano. Things just change. People are constantly trying to improve how we teach or how we play the instrument. So you want to stay up to date on pedagogy and method books and know what's out there, because you don't want to trap yourself and hinder your teaching. You also don't want to hold your student back or put them in a curriculum that just absolutely does not work for them. Lastly, another thing that I see quite a bit is teachers neglecting teaching keyboard topography correctly or at all, and then also failing to teach directional reading. So keyboard topography, you want the student to know and recognize 2 and 3 black key groups, also what notes are C, D, E, and what notes are F, G, A, B, and not get them all confused. But keyboard topography is even more than that. You want to get your beginner students playing all across the keyboard immediately. And I'll make a video on this too, because this is a really important concept, and I'll go into more detail on why that's important. But I'll just state right now, you need to get your beginners playing across the keyboard so that they're comfortable with it. And that by the time they get into pieces that are big pieces that have them do that, they're already comfortable having to move and jump, and they know where these keys live on the keyboard. A way to do that, and also a way to help with note reading, you want to teach rote pieces. And by rote pieces, that means pieces that you teach them how to play. They can't read the music, they don't really understand the rhythm. So you're basically spoon feeding them how to play a piece. And I can make a video on how to do that as well. That's a really important thing. Rote pieces, if they're strategically chosen, will get them playing across the keyboard very quickly. And then they can focus on learning finger numbers, keyboard topography, and also technique. And they don't have to worry about notes and fingering and rhythm and other things like that. We simplify it for them so they can focus on the things that they need to right away. Another thing is, when they're learning rote, you also want to be teaching them directional reading, and you want to use pre-reading for that, or some teachers call it floating notes. The actual term is pre-reading music, where they see the notes on different levels on the page. I know some teachers have a problem with pre-reading music because they think it's difficult to read, but the problem is they are failing to understand how to teach it. I'm going to make another video very soon on how to teach early reading skills and why pre-reading is important, and then how to teach that pre-reading so that it doesn't just look like a bunch of notes floating on the page. There's a way to teach it and things that you can do with the music to help students read it easier. But teaching pre-reading is teaching directional reading. If students don't understand how the notes go up and down on a page or a staff, they're not going to understand or be quick at reading how to go up and down on the keyboard while reading it going up and down this way on the page. And the second thing you want to teach them is intervallic reading, which is part of directional reading. But you want to teach them intervals and how to recognize them quickly. For example, your thirds and your fifths are line to line, space to space. Your seconds and your fourths are line to space or space to line. You want them to be able to see that and recognize it very quickly. And again, I'll tag another video on here of apps that I use to help with teaching reading. And one of them is centered around directional reading and intervallic reading. So I'll link that video here as well. So I think that wraps it up. I know this is a longer video, but those are 9 rookie mistakes that I'm just gonna say probably every single brand new piano teacher makes at some point in their time. So I hope this video helps you get off to a strong start and doesn't trap you into these issues. And then you're like, oh man, I have all these problems with my students now. So if you have other questions on things, or if you want more details on things, or if you have questions on certain topics that I didn't discuss today, because there are many things that, teachers starting out can mess up on or not know, just let me know in the comments and I'll make a video on that. And I'll see you in the next one.